Okay, well, welcome to the Cleveland Law Library and the Cleveland Public Library's book discussion. We're happy to welcome back Joshua Cohen. He's here today with us live on Zoom. We are recording this event just in case that matters to you. Mr. Cohen debuted his writing talents in 2021 with his first novel, The Best Assassination in the Nation. And today he's back with his second novel entitled Past Imperfect. And it's a sequel because it also revisits the life and times of a gritty detective named Benny Gold. And this time he investigates a claim at a local Cleveland temple that someone, a member of that temple, is a former Nazi collaborator. And the book contains a huge twist at the end, which I was not expecting, but enjoyed. And if you like film noir, you're going to love this book. Kirkus Book Reviews has said Mr. Cohen's novel is an intimate mystery with a determined, complex lead. Ooh, isn't that intriguing? So, Helena, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Helena Trapka, subject department librarian in social sciences department, and today's my last day.
And Helena and I will be facilitating today's discussion. And now, Mr. Cohen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Josh Cohen, and I am a lawyer here in town. I've lived in Cleveland for about 40 years, and although I was originally from here when I was a kid, I practiced law at the firm of Cohen, Rosenthal, and Kramer. We do civil litigation, and I started writing when my youngest kid went to college. Gave me time to do it, and so I picked it up, and I've been able to finish a couple of books since then, and this is the product of it.
So we're grateful to have him here. And I guess I'll just start off the discussion by saying, since you've written two, how would writing your second novel compare to writing your first?
The second novel was a lot easier than writing the first because the character, Benny Gold, was fully developed. I mean, we knew a lot about him already. And even though you couldn't assume that readers of the second book had read the first book, I knew I had a good conception of what he was about and what he thought about things. And so the only challenge in writing the second book was to come up with the various plot twists, which was challenging, but there was a lot more conceptual stuff that had to be dealt with the first time that I didn't face the second time.
So where did you get your plot and your twists? Where did it come up from?
Well, the original idea for the story came from a story that my mom had told me years and years ago. And she had told me that she had gone to synagogue one time, and during the services, someone there had identified someone else who was there as someone who had been a capo, one of the facilitators in the concentration camps at the concentration camp where that person had been. And in that instance, in the real instance, the person who was identified admitted that he had been there and had done that. And it was just sort of an ugly sort of interlude. So I started thinking about how that could be an interesting sort of conflict for a private investigator to have to investigate, and particularly if the stakes were raised, meaning that this was a prominent guy, the accused was prominent and a big figure in the community, and so that was where the premise came. And then the second part of that was that I thought that it was a good idea to have the accused also have things to hide about his present, that he wasn't as good as not as shining knight as he was presented about, given what was going on in his current life. He, like in this case, he was a slum landlord. He did various things, and so I combined those two things and went from there.
Just as an aside, and feel free to jump in, everybody. Do you know what happened in the real live case of the accusation that was true?
I don't, my understanding, and again, this is just that the accusation was made and the guy admitted that he wasn't going to be subject to prosecution or anything for it. So he just had to live with the humiliation of being identified in a public place as a Nazi collaborator. And I don't know how, how he fared after that, but the story was a very stark one when my mom told it to me.
Got you. So let's get into your novel, I guess. You open your novel with Benny watching an episode of Perry Mason. And are you a big fan?
I am not a real big fan. I like it, and when I see it, but I don't haven't sought it out. I've actually read more Perry Mason books than I have seen episodes on TV. And the reason I chose the Perry Mason episode for the book was that Yom Kippur on the year that this book was taking place took place on a Saturday. And I looked in the TV guide or whatever you call it for that time, and the big show that was on the air at that time on Saturday nights was Perry Mason. So I had him watching Perry Mason.
Got you. And your character, Benny, wants to be a detective like Dick Powell or Humphrey Bogart, famous actors. Mm-hmm. Is that your secret desire too?
Well, I think everyone has a secret desire to be as cool as those guys are. I mean, they're funny and they're quick thinking and they're able to handle anything that's thrown at them. So that would be obviously nice characteristics to have. But I have no, being a private eye as it's portrayed in the 40s and 50s is a lot different than being a private eye in this day and age, where there's a lot of computer stuff like in forensics, and I don't think there's as much face-to-face confrontation and things like that. So I've never, fantasized about actually doing that sort of work, but I have, in fantasies thought, hey, I could be like Humphrey Bogart, or I could be like Dick Powell. I think a lot of people have.
Sure. And you just analogized or compared the way that detectives did it in the old days and now they're doing it now. And I noticed throughout your book that there were a lot of people lying, telling little lies, big lies. Are those the kind of hurdles that private investigators are still facing today?
I don't know if those are the type of hurdles that private investigators are facing today. I would suspect so, because I can say that in practicing law and putting together cases for presentation at trial or whatever, that they're always, I don't know what I call them lies, but untruths. But what I would say is that in this genre, in the genre of detective fiction and noir fiction, these sorts of lies are what makes the world go round. That if everybody told the truth, it would be a very short book and not much mystery. So everyone's got some sort of subterfuge they're pulling and whatever. And that's why that was such a prominent aspect of the book, the lying, which you're right. I mean, Benny lied, everybody lied at some point.
Yeah, a lot of people, and some big lies too,
Right.
That Benny had to really push to get the truth.
Right.
So let's address a serious issue. In the acknowledgments, you indicate that your mother helped provide information about the concentration camps and the Jewish ghettos. I wonder if it was difficult for her to talk about those kind of things.
My mother had, first of all, she is a Holocaust scholar of sorts. She had put together a program in San Antonio where I grew up, where they go into the public schools and teach a curriculum about the Holocaust, and she's been doing that for 20 some years. And she also was one of the organizers of the Holocaust memorial that they have there. So she's extremely well read in on these topics, and she knows what the books are. She knows what the facts are, and so it was a very easy reference. I don't think it distressed her to talk about it because she's just so familiar with it. Obviously, the topic generally is distressing to her. I mean, she's not cold to it, but I think she was happy to lend her expertise here, and I was very happy to have it because the book would have taken me half a year longer to write if I hadn't had that resource, because I had, any questions I had about the Holocaust, or if I need, what book do I read to find out this, she would tell me where to go.
And, you brought up some things in the books about how the Jews were extorted and abused. I had never heard of, and I may mispronounce it, Judenrecht councils?
Yeah, the Judenrat, yeah.
Okay. So those really occurred, and Jews turned on Jews.
Well, the historical treatment of the Judenrat has changed. At the time the book is set in the 50s, the Judenrat was viewed by scholars as being collaborators, and that they were viewed as bad guys. And there was some of this mercenary sort of stuff where they would take bribes and whatever. But as time has gone on, members of the Judenrat have been seen more now as victims themselves, because they were kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. What were they going to do? You couldn't tell the Nazis, no, we're not going to do this. And what was going to happen no matter whether they were involved or not. So there was a legitimate place to say, if I'll stay involved, I'll do this and try to make it more manageable and more humane than it otherwise would have been. But in terms of whether there had been, there were instances where certain people took advantage of that power. I can't give you a statistic as to how prevalent it was, but it did happen.
Right. So a lot of the characters are Jewish in the book. So for those of you who've read it, did you wonder why, Mendel Kahn had a Russian enforcer instead of, someone else?
He actually was a Polish enforcer.
Oh, okay.
And the reason that I made him Polish was because Mendel Kahn was from Poland, and so was Yitzhak Fried. Both of them were from Poland, so it created the perception, or at least the possibility, that this was a henchman of a bad guy who was doing the bidding of a countryman. And so that's why I did it that way. I have to say that in retrospect, I think that's probably the least subtle aspect of the book. I mean, the fact that a downtown businessman would have that sort of henchman working for him is a little bit far afield, I think. But that was the reason that he was in there.
And you mentioned Fried. Would you tell us a little bit about Fried and the accusation against him?
Yeah, Yitzhak Fried was actually based on a real live guy. There was a book that I read, and I think it's called The Reckoning. It was by an Israeli author that talked about former collaborators, Jewish collaborators, who went on trial in Israel after the war. And there was a particular guy who got tried 3 times. He was someone who had been on the Judenrat in Bedzin, the same town where Yitzhak Fried was supposedly a member of the Judenrat, and had gone to Auschwitz and had a work crew there. So to make sure that I was not, going too far afield, I made Yitzhak Fried mirror this guy's experience, and so I think that the guy in real life got off with a very, very light sentence, and it was at least, I think, arguable whether he did everything that he was accused of doing. I think in at least the way I meant to convey it, it was less arguable that Yitzhak Fried had done what he was accused of doing. So, but as a general proposition, I fashioned Yitzhak Fried on this guy from this book who had been put through the ringer, and this guy was someone who used to, back in the camps, would refer to the people in his work crew as my Jews. These are my Jews. And he completely changed his tune by the time he was put on trial and became much more contrite and whatever. And we don't see any sort of transformation like that with Yitzhak Fried. I mean, we don't deal with him directly at all, but there wasn't that.
Yeah, and I just wondered about the lawyers in the audience. What did you think of that sentence that he received? I mean, it was a slap on the wrist, Anyone want to comment on that? Everyone's being quiet. Well, how about the payment that came from Kahn to pay for Fried's fees? I thought that was a shocker. Why'd you do that?
Well, I think that really spoke to just how amoral Mendel Kahn was. And what he says in the book, as I recall it, is Benny asked him, did he care at all whether he was guilty or not? He said no. He was doing this for purely tactical reasons. And I just thought that was an interesting way to portray that. And so I tried it out, and he did it. And I don't know how extensive the need for lawyering was back in those days in terms of the types of hearings. These hearings were not they weren't primetime events as they would be, I think, now. But still, you needed a lawyer, and Mendel Kahn paid for it.
So can we talk about the big twist in the book?
Sure.
Mendel Kahn is not a Nazi sympathizer, but he's a bad guy. So did you plan on that?
When I originally conceived of the book, at the very, very beginning, I thought that Mendel Kahn would be the Nazi collaborator, and that's how it would play out. But there's a couple of things that worked against it. Number one is that you don't want to have the mystery solved at the beginning. And so if you're telling everyone at the beginning who the bad guy turns out to be, it's not as compelling a story. And also making him a different type of bad guy enabled me to speak to that other theme I had mentioned earlier, and that is that there are different type of bad guys here. There was this Nazi collaborator, but Mendel Kahn was a bad guy in another sense. I mean, he was a Nazi collaborator. He was not a very nice guy with his girlfriends or whatever. He was just not a model citizen. And I thought that was a good way to portray that and to create a contrast between that type of character and the type of character that Yitzhak Fried had. Obviously, being a slum landlord is not the moral equivalent, I guess, of being a Nazi capo. I mean, I don't know how you would draw that comparison, but the fact of the matter is that neither of them speak too highly of your character. and I wanted to create a situation where even if the guy wasn't who he was originally suspected of being, he wasn't off the hook for his conduct. And I also, last thing I'll say about this is that when I was growing up as a kid, in my synagogue, there was a very pious member of the congregation who was a slum landlord, and it freaked me out. I could not understand how a guy could be so religious and be so observant, and at the same time earn his living by running horrible places to people for more money than it's worth. So I wanted to incorporate that idea into the book as well.
And the way he deals with his tenants too, like I can't remember her name. Was it
Surely.
Shirley, yes,
Yeah.
how he dealt with Shirley. Can you talk a little bit about that? The individual payoffs to the tenants, and that kind of, it's almost like under the table and just, avoid litigation, keep the name out of the news kind of stuff.
Right. I mean, what Benny did was Benny filed these suits on behalf of tenants because what he was trying to do was to show Khan's real character, and that was going to be his defense to the defamation claims. So, I didn't ruin his character. His character was horrible from the beginning, and his reputation was horrible from the beginning, and these lawsuits prove it. And so what Khan's cynical lawyer decided to do is say, okay, we're going to get rid of these things, and what we're going to do is we're going to pay off the supposed victims who were clearly victims, and there wasn't really much question about liability. We'll pay them off, and we can portray this as some sort of humanitarian gesture. So it was an extremely cynical act, and it really was, if you looked at it closely enough, it was a confession of guilt, but it was a cynical act, and it was done for purely tactical reasons to, preserve the strength of his defamation claim against Benny.
Yeah. What did, Helena, do you have a question?
Yeah, I know when you have the character Chandra Burns in it with his background and everything else, did you do it on purpose to kind of shadow or cast a light that Khan was not as good because of the company he kept and the people he knew, and especially with his enforcer and everything, because I'm assuming Chandra Burns had enforcers and other like that.
Chandra Burns had all that. No, I think that you're exactly right, that by giving Mendel kind of background with Chandra Burns, that left no question about what type of character he had, putting aside whether he was a Nazi collaborator or not. This is a guy who's cavorting with public enemy number one.
Yeah.
And so that created the tension I was trying to develop. This is a bad guy, whether he's the Nazi collaborator or not. So yeah, that was the function of that.
Yeah, because you didn't. It was kind of funny. Chandra Burns was just like such a minor character, but it spoke a lot within the book, I think, for character of Khan.
Yeah, I was worried too by making Chandra Burns too big of a character because I wanted it to be historically accurate. Mm. And I'd read a biography of his that had been written by a recent author, that was by a local author that was very good, but I didn't want to go too far out on a limb. But I got him in there just enough to I think convey the message. And I was able to, I put a reference in the book about the fact that the month before this meeting supposedly took place between Gold and Chandra Burns had been on trial for killing a black affiliate in the policy racket. And it was a open and shut case. I mean, they had it, and it ended in a hung jury. This guy got away with everything. So he was evil incarnate. He really was.
I think you did an excellent job of putting that connection in without going overboard.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did you have to change any names to protect the innocents, or did your publisher make you change any names? I've had other authors tell me that.
No, well, the only name that is a real name in there is Chandra Burns. The other names, it's interesting you asked that, because the other names are of people that I've known in other contexts. For instance, Sophie Himmel is the daughter of one of my closest friends. And I called her beforehand. I just thought the name was so perfect for this character. And I, asked her if she would be all right with that. And so I didn't have to change any names to protect the innocent or to avoid any sort of liability. I will tell you one funny story about that, is that the Harry Slab, the henchman, name was Jersey Dudek, which I, went to great lengths to research what the surnames were and what were the proper names that were being used in Poland at the time. So I came up with this Jersey Dudek, and I was very, very proud of it. And so just recently I was on the internet and I saw that there is a soccer player out of Poland who's like in his 30s now, named Jersey Dudek. So he probably thinks I stole his name, if he ever had reason to think about it. So
well, maybe he'll appreciate the, cross-reference or whatever. Who knows?
Yeah, let's hope.
If he's not famous yet, maybe he will be, right?
Yeah.
So I think, like in the last book, Benny represents himself again as his own lawyer. Is that right?
Right.
And, the saying goes, you have a fool for a client if you represent yourself. And he negotiated what I thought was a rather interesting settlement again, like he did in your first book. Can you talk a little bit about those settlement terms and, how that came about?
Yeah, I mean, what he's faced with a situation where he has defamation claims pending against him, which are very serious. And he's coming up with a defense, but he knows that he, has gone around town and made comments that have portrayed Mendel Kahn as a Nazi collaborator, and that could get him in hot water. So he was his neck was on the line. But on the other hand, he had dirt on Mendel Kahn about, very serious dirt, albeit on not exactly the same subject, about how he snuck into the country and how he had murdered someone in Europe in order to enable him to sneak in. So what he did was Benny got affidavits from people that knew about this that could confirm that Mendel had done what he was accused of doing. And what Benny did was agree to put that, evidence, give it at the deep six. Forget it, it's gone. He won't let that out in exchange for dismissal of the defamation claim. He also made sure that his secretary got compensated for some hardship that Mendel Kahn had inflicted on her, and he made sure that Mendel Kahn compensated his sister, who was one of the signators of the affidavit. Made sure he took care of her. So it was, it really was it wasn't the most honorable resolution for Benny. It wasn't like he was going out and vindicating a principle here. It was self-protection that he was engaged in, and he got as much as he could on the other end of it, getting something for the sister and getting something for his secretary. But this was not, wasn't marching proudly into the sunset with this settlement. So that's what it was.
And the information about Kahn's activities eventually got to the government through another person. But do you think in the back of my mind, I thought Benny's going to violate that settlement agreement and send the information to the government. I mean, isn't that what he did in book one?
That's what he was going to do it in book two, but he didn't have to because somebody else beat him to it. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, again, that's a reflection on his character of sorts. I mean, he can't do that sort of thing. And he was put in the same sort of situation where, he knew stuff that was incriminating, that he was, albeit under much different circumstances in book one, had been forbidden from sharing. And he just, at some point, just says, "To hell with it. I'm going to do what I got to do." So,
right.
I think those kinds of moral dilemmas can happen, I'm sure, with lawyers and with family members and everything. It's like, do I protect the person or do I turn them in? And so, it's something I think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he went through quite a crisis of conscience about this. I mean, he was minding his P's and Q's until he ran into Mendel Khan at synagogue on Yom Kippur. And Mendel Khan was kind of rubbing his nose in the resolution. And he just said, I can't live with this. He says that there are certain sins that I can't atone for. And letting this guy get away with this is just not right. And he, if he had been the one who had released the affidavits, and it became known, that was not going to be without consequence for Benny. He was going to incur liability, I mean, for defamation and all sorts of things. And God knows what else, maybe contempt of court, who knows. But he had reached a point where he, didn't want to do it anymore. And fortunately, somebody else beat him to the punch, and he wasn't forced to make the decision.
And I wonder about other people in the book who seem to get off, like Beryl and Joseph Oppenheimer.
Mm-hmm.
They concealed crimes and lied about it, and I wondered, is that book 3?
It's not book 3, but I just felt that, it wasn't, to be honest with you, it wasn't something I was really thinking about. And I was just sort of assuming that the government would let them go for their concealment. They weren't the principal bad actor, and that they were coming forward now. And so we're getting a pass because they were giving the evidence ultimately. But if I had to deal with, their legal troubles as well, it would have become very complicated, I think. And I'm not quite frankly sure how I would have resolved it. So I left it alone.
Gotcha. So I alluded to a book 3. There is going to be a book 3, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
And you've started it?
Yes, I have outlined it, so I know what it's about. So I can tell you that in book 3, Benny is representing a woman by the name of Irene Good, who is a Black woman who comes to him for help in getting paid on a life insurance policy for her husband who had been murdered. The police can't solve the case. They never solved the case, but the insurance company suspects that she was behind the murder and is not paying off on that basis. Turns out that her husband was someone who had just purchased a house in Shaker Heights. African-American family had purchased a house in a part of Shaker Heights that wasn't accommodating to that sort of integration. And the owner had refused to sell to him. And so what happened was a Good Samaritan intervened, bought the house, and then resold it to her husband. And so after that happened, there still was a lot of controversy about the sale. The neighbors were furious because they didn't want to, they, thought their property values were going to go down having a Black neighbor. There was a controversy between the Good Samaritan and the husband because apparently the husband hadn't, or allegedly hadn't paid him off all the way. And there were disputes with contractors about being paid for the work they were doing in remodeling the house. And the wife, in coming to Benny Gold, thinks that those culprits, the people from those disputes, are the ones who arranged for her husband's demise and not her. She also lets him know that her husband had a former mistress who was angry and was also a potential suspect too. So Benny's got to sort out all this and figure out who did the killing and try to prove that it certainly wasn't the wife. So that's the basic premise.
So it's going to be juicy with a lot of characters.
Yep. Yes, it will be. I hope so.
And of course, you're not going to let us know until the end who did it.
Yeah. I have an idea who did it, but I'm not fully convinced yet. So
now, where did you get this idea, if we can ask?
I got this idea because I'm trying to keep the books topical. I mean, relevant to what's going on in the 50s, and the civil rights movement was hot then. Mm-hmm. It also was in Shaker Heights. There were developments going on. There had been turmoil about integration, and there had been a movement in Shaker Heights in an area called Ludlow, where they were making very good progress along these lines, but there were pockets of the city where the progress wasn't being seen. So I just thought that again was a good vehicle for a private eye to get involved in this. He's also acting in part as a lawyer here too. But I just thought that, this was a sort of a contemporaneous dispute that was taking place then about something that was, going on in the world at the time. And I thought that's what I would put Benny in the middle
of. Gotcha.
I don't remember if we asked before, but your books just flow so well and everything. And the characters are really fun, solid characters. Have you had any movie or TV options?
I will tell you that I think in the spring of this year, I got a letter from a clearinghouse that said there's been an inquiry made by a major developer about wanting rights for The Best Assassination in the Nation, the first book. Are they available? And I said yes. And for about a week there, I got excited, but nothing happened. So that would be great.
Wasn't the right one yet.
Yeah, it would be great if it happened, but I don't foresee it happening. So,
well, Peter Kirsanow, who's been with us for a couple of book discussions and is at a local law firm in town as well, had told us that it takes about 10 years from book to movie. Who knows, right?
Yeah. Well, I got nothing but time, so that'd be fine. So,
and I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but that's what his, because there was a lot of interest in his books as well.
Right. So we'll see.
Well, that would be very exciting.
Yes.
So any other questions from the audience? Helena, anything you want to add, Mr. Cohen?
No, I just, for those of you who've read it, I thank you for doing so, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And again, I'm really appreciative that there are people out there who are still reading, and that's good.
Now, hopefully we'll have more people reading because of what's going on with the writers and actor strikes and everything. I know I'm going to be, as always, pushing all of my friends and everything. But hopefully, once there isn't that much good stuff on TV, they'll start reading something even more.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
And pick up your books.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us again, and keep us in mind for your third novel. We'll be looking forward to seeing it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Everyone have a great day, and thank you for joining us.